Chapter 19 The Duchy, Part 1.
Philomena!
Twilight shot up out of bed, heart thumping. She had her hoof outstretched, grasping for an arcane javelin that was nowhere to be seen.
Whoa! Hey, calm down now.
Twilight blinked in rapid succession, taking in her surroundings. She was in the little medical room aboard the Argo. A heavy rubber collar was fixed around her neck, constricting her breathing. It glowed a gentle lavender as she made to rip it off.
What? Stop that!
Dusty Tome's pale green hooves reached out to unclasp the collar's latch before Twilight broke it.
It's expensive!
Twilight took deep breaths, forcing her racing heart to slow.
Sorry. I was just... thought it was somewhere else.
She swung her hooves off the bed to stand, but Dusty stretched out a leg to hold her back.
Hold on a second now. You need some rest,
he said. Twilight reached out to brush him aside. He stepped back, letting her slide off the bed and onto her hooves without further resistance.
I feel fine. Where's Philomena?
Dusty cocked his head. He shot a nervous glance towards the door behind him, tugging at the lapel of his jacket with almost imperceptibly thin magic.
I don't know who that is, Twilight.
Twilight shook her head, holding it in one hoof. She remembered speaking with the other, watching herself make to strike down Philomena, but then... what? It was all blank.
The Phoenix! The glowing monster we fought!
She met Dusty's eyes, leaning in close.
Did it survive?
He leaned away from her, not meeting her gaze.
You killed it, Twilight. You saved every pony, but our...
Twilight slumped back against the bed, sending it rolling into the diagnostic machine next to it. She sighed, closing her eyes.
But I didn't mean to. I'm sorry.
A few moments passed before Dusty's voice broke the silence.
Hey, are you alright? Your suit was in shreds when they brought you up here, and they said you just teleported back onto the sub and then passed out. You had wet ashes plastered all over your coat. I'm... fine,
Twilight said. She opened her eyes and looked down at herself. Her coat was matted and clammy, but the body beneath was bereft of wounds.
I'm fine. But why?
She had been on the brink of death before, and now she felt well rested and whole. A pang of anxiety formed in her chest.
Was I out very long?
Dusty shook his head.
It's only been about an hour since the sub returned. Are you sure you're okay?
He took a tentative step forwards.
I had to cut what was left of your dive suit off of you. The ocean should have crushed you. Yes, it should have.
Twilight blinked, taken aback at the thought.
What about the others?
The other unicorn shrugged.
Flint and Saber had some minor burns and Applejack some bruising. I actually just managed to get your friends out so I could focus on you. Thank you, Dusty,
Twilight said.
At least it wasn't a total loss.
She had saved her friends, and that was something to be grateful over. She would have only put every pony in danger by trying to speak to Philomena. The Phoenix had clearly fallen victim to the same terrible condition that had taken Aloysius. Twilight could only hope that Celestia's old companion would find some peace.
Or perhaps her ashes will coalesce in a few days, and she'll be tortured once more. Perhaps she's already died 12 times.
Twilight shoved the thoughts aside, standing up.
I should go see my friends.
Dusty stepped to the side.
I'm sure they'd like that.
Twilight nodded. She slipped out into the hall without a word, making for the cargo hold that had become her home. The other Twilight had saved her and her friends when it subjugated her will. With the determination to survive behind her and the benefit of hindsight with her, she had to admit that she would have likely failed in the endeavor without its help. For the first time, she began to wonder if it was really as evil as she had thought. She glanced at the cloudy horizon visible in the passing windows. Hadn't it always acted in her interest, protecting her and her friends? She shook her head, chastising herself for her foolishness. It had tainted her with violent thoughts, whispering terrible things into her ears. It had killed Philomena, and it had banged against the bars of her mind, yearning to kill many more in the past. She had no proof, but she suspected that it was of the same corruption that had turned equestrians against each other in the past. It was evil, and she could not allow herself to forget that. Yet it had saved her. Twilight let out a relieved breath as she walked into the dining room. Applejack was nursing a brass mug as she spoke in quiet tones with Fluttershy.
Hey, girls!
Fluttershy was the first to react.
Twilight!
She flapped her wings, latching onto Twilight with a surprisingly firm hug.
Oh, we were so worried.
Applejack followed soon after, laying a hoof on Twilight's shoulder.
Shucks, Philly. You gave us a right scare there. I'm getting way too much practice in with waiting on friends to wake up.
Twilight offered a sheepish grin.
Sorry, girls. I'll try not to make it into a trend.
It's already a trend by my reckoning, Applejack said as she and Fluttershy stepped back.
How you feeling? It can't be a trend until there's 3 data points, Applejack. I'm feeling fine.
Twilight decided to ignore the near imperceptible arch of her friend's eyebrow.
Definitely much better than I thought I would be. Where's Rainbow? Oh, she's, practicing,
Fluttershy said.
She's in the hold with Sea Saber.
Yeah, she's been pretty keen on learning to fight ever since... Applejack paused, taking a sip from her mug to cover herself.
Chat, why don't you all go tell the Twice, all right? Oh, okay,
Fluttershy said, backing up a few steps before turning for the doorway.
I'll be back in a little bit, I guess.
Twilight watched her go, reluctant to meet her other friend's gaze. When she did, she found her worries realized in Applejack's.
It's gotten worse, ain't it?
Twilight sighed. She plopped herself down into a chair and rubbed at her eyes with a hoof. Once she blinked the stars away, she noticed Applejack offering her a mug from the seat beside her. Twilight took it with her magic and gave it an inquisitive sniff.
More of Flint's cider.
After a moment's deliberation, she lifted the mug to her lips and took a long, hearty draw. A few seconds passed before Applejack spoke.
Y'all want to go somewhere a mite less public?
Twilight shook her head, offering the mug back. The aftertaste clung to her tongue.
No, I'm fine. Just give me some time to collect my thoughts.
She took a couple deep breaths, her eyes outlining the stains worn into the table.
What happened?
I'd been hoping y'all would be the one telling me that, Applejack said, accepting the mug and peeking into it. Land's sakes, girl, it's almost all gone.
I don't remember what happened is the thing,
Twilight admitted. She kept her eyes on the table.
Not completely, at least.
I see, Applejack said. Silent seconds passed as the knot of anxiety in Twilight's chest grew. At last, Applejack leaned back in her seat and pushed the mug aside. Well, after y'all quit responding on the radio, Saber told Flint to go find you, which he did, just in time for that monster to light you up. Then all of a sudden, y'all were out in the water, glowing something fierce and charging right at the thing. Twilight shivered, leaning into her friend.
I killed it. I remember that. Just about hit the sub and killed us with some of those magic beams, too.
Applejack groused. She wrapped a leg around Twilight's shoulder.
We all saved us in the end, Twi. Ain't no way we would have gotten out of that without you.
Twilight felt her throat tighten. She squeezed her eyes shut as she forced the next words out.
It was Philomena. I killed Philomena, AJ.
Philomena?
Applejack echoed. Again, the silent seconds. She pulled Twilight closer, lowering her voice.
Shoot, Twi. It ain't y'all's fault. I think she was long gone. You did her a service.
No, I didn't!
Twilight snapped.
I could have saved her! If I just kept control, then she'd have survived!
A sob racked her body.
I killed Celestia's pet! She might have known where to find her.
Twilight Sparkle, you best hush with that nonsense.
Applejack's stern voice was clear in Twilight's ears.
Y'all know there ain't no sense in that kind of speculating. Even a half-blind hen can find a rattlesnake in November if she don't stop looking.
Twilight let out a groan and buried her face in Applejack's fur for the second time that week. She latched onto the other mare's words, turning them over in her head. A sob and a laugh competed for dominance.
I don't know what that's supposed to mean.
She could feel Applejack's grin against her forehead.
What I mean is that y'all are seeing guilt where it don't exist. Y'all don't know any of those things, Sugar Cube. You did the best any pony could have done. It's all that matters.
The laughter went out, and Twilight didn't have the will to resist. She snorted, a sloppy smile breaking out onto her face as a few salty tears dripped down her cheeks.
There's more.
Go on then.
That thing I told you about?
Twilight began.
The dark thing, do you remember? It spoke to me.
What?
Applejack pulled back, looking Twilight in the eyes.
What are you saying, darling?
It's...
Twilight gulped as she searched for a proper word.
It's intelligent, I think. It took over. It forced me into dreaming. And I was just so tired.
The concern in Applejack's eyes nearly held Twilight back, but she pushed on, her voice shaking.
I can't do this all alone any longer. It kept telling me, go to sleep. I'm not sure if I would have ever woken up. But I didn't, and it still took control. I could feel it, and I was far away, and it killed Philomena. It killed her, and I couldn't stop myself.
There was a long moment where Applejack just looked at her, and Twilight began to worry she had said too much. Would her friend cast her out? What if she told the others? She thought back to Aloysius floating dead in the water, leaking blood from the wound Star Trail's javelin had given him, and to the fresh memory of Philomena lying crippled on a statue of her old master.
What if I'm next? The next thing to be put down and mourned because I was already gone.
She flinched as Applejack pulled her back into a tight embrace. A comforting huff ran down her mane.
Thank y'all for telling me, Twi. We can take care of it together now, you hear?
Twilight sniffled, letting her stiff body relax as the fears drifted away.
Are you going to tell the others?
There was only a moment of hesitation.
Do y'all want me to?
Twilight shook her head.
I don't want them worrying. We can tell them later.
Alrighty, Sugar Cube,
Applejack said.
Y'all just promise to tell me when anything happens, okay? I'll help you through it.
Thank you, Applejack.
Twilight closed her eyes. A semblance of peace began to take hold as Applejack hummed a soothing tone into her ear.
Thank you. I'm not a great fan of this Duke Titus, darling,
Rarity said. She frowned in the hoof mirror floating before her as she checked her makeup. Pinkie gave an exaggerated nod from where she sat on Rarity's bed.
He's a real grouchy, that's for sure. I got a good feeling about him, though. Goodness, but how could you?
Rarity dabbed at her cheeks absent-mindedly with a cotton.
He barely gave us the time of day until his son trotted in with that gaping fish mouth of his.
She paused in her ministrations just long enough to curl her lip at her reflection.
And he called me a harlot. A harlot, Pinkie! What's wrong with being a harlot?
Pinkie asked. Rarity nearly dropped the mirror. She turned to hit the other mirror with an incredulous stare. Pinkie blinked back at her.
What? A harlot?
Rarity repeated. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting out a brief sigh before reopening them.
Pinkie, dear, do you know what a harlot is? I thought I did,
Pinkie muttered, tapping at her muzzle with a hoof.
It's some kind of clown, right? It's a call girl,
Rarity said. She turned back to stare intently into her hoof mirror, forcing a conversational tone.
A lady is not stirred by petty insults. You know, a courtesan, a fille de joie.
Through the mirror, she saw Pinkie crack a nervous smile.
A prostitute!
Rarity snapped. She looked up to the cloudscape painted onto the ceiling of the chamber Titus had given her, and let out a guttural groan.
It's a prostitute, Pinkie! Oh,
Pinkie said. A moment later, Rarity felt warm hooves wrapped tightly around her.
Don't worry, Rare Bear. We all know you're not a harlot.
Rarity couldn't help but smile as she leaned into the hug.
I appreciate it, darling.
A few moments passed while she allowed her pent-up ire to drift away.
Okay, that's quite enough of that. I need to check my mane now.
Pinkie gave her one last squeeze before stepping back. Rarity wasted no time in returning her attention to the hoof mirror and performing some expert adjustments with her comb. They would be speaking with Duke Titus again, the brute, and Rarity wasn't going to let his barbarous tongue get in the way of all the good she could do for Equestria, no matter how disgraceful it was. She found herself thinking back to Mr. Lay Drifts from Fellis.
I wonder, how many ponies of this ilk will I have to suffer to get the job done?
A knock at the door grabbed her attention.
Who is it?
Is Pinkie with you, Countess? Whitehorn's voice asked from out in the hall. She's not in her room.
Right here,
Pinkie sang, bouncing up to the door and pulling it open. Ah, there you are, Whitehorn said. He looked away, raising his voice a little bit. Are you proper, my lady? I was just going to speak with the Duke and would quite enjoy you mare's company.
You know we don't normally wear clothes, right?
Pinkie asked. Choosing not to fall into that particular conversation trap again, Rarity ignored the comment and fluttered her eyelashes at her reflection. She was wearing a simple pale blue dress with golden highlights around her neck and hooves. She let out a small tut of satisfaction before setting the mirror aside.
Yes, I think I'm about ready. Shall we set forth?
The three ponies started down the hall at a gradual walk, keeping roughly abreast. I'd like to apologize for the incident last evening, my lady, Whitehorn said. Rarity angled her head towards him. A wonderfully crafted painting of a column-adorned cloud city passed by, framing him in its splendor.
Whatever for, darling?
The Duke, of course, Whitehorn shook his head. I should have warned you about that roughness of his. I apologize for the rude comment he made, as well as any others he imposes on you during our time here. They reached the end of the hall, and Rarity levitated the door open for the three of them with her magic.
That's quite kind of you, but I won't have you begging forgiveness over another's crass words,
she said. She gave him a small smile as she followed him and Pinkie through the door.
As long as we're remembering what we came for, I think it may even be worth the trouble.
Whitehorn dipped his head and returned the smile. Your nobility never ceases to impress, my lady. Also... He paused, and Rarity arched a brow.
Yes?
It's unlike the Duke to have changed his mind so suddenly over an infatuation of his son, Whitehorn said, the smile fading. He lowered his voice as they approached the door to the dining hall. It's also unlike Pontius to gawk over a pretty mare. I suspect there's some other motive at play. Rarity heaved a sigh.
There always is, isn't there? Don't worry, Rarity,
Pinkie said, laying a leg over Rarity's shoulder and leaning into her ear.
I'll be watching them both. Nothing gets past Pinkie when she's on the case. Thank you, dear,
Rarity said, patting the other mare's hoof.
I appreciate it. Shall we get on, then? It would be awfully awkward if we were caught loitering in the hall like this.
The three ponies entered as one into the dining hall. Duke Titus, wearing a robe of identical design from yesterday, was discussing something with a stern-faced Pegasus and a light set of scarred metal barding. He looked up from the map laid out on the table at the sound of the door opening, and dipped his head to the newcomers as he rolled it up. Allow me to entertain my guests, Poe, he said, pushing the map away with a hoof. I'll take your report in the afternoon. Paul executed a short bow. Yes, my lord. He grabbed the map with a wing, rolling it up and tucking it to his side, before walking past the visitors and out into the hall. He kept his eyes pointedly facing forwards. Whitehorn gave the Duke a good-natured smile as he sat himself down at the table. Anything we should be worried about, my lord? Titus grunted. He turned his attention to a plate of roasted vegetables sitting in a shallow sauce beside him. Just landowner's business, Whitehorn. I hope your lot found your rooms acceptable. You hungry?
I know I am,
Pinkie cheered, hopping onto his seat before Rarity and yet another breach of proper hoof maiden protocol.
What's for breakfast? Cupcakes? Pie? I had a dream involving some eccentric key limes last night, and I could use some closure. I don't think the Duke is quite the pastry fan that you are, Pinkie,
Rarity said, lowering herself daintily onto a cushion. A part of her was glad to see that the Duke seemed to have so little regard for social rules. No doubt a more proper noble would have little respect for a countess with such an unruly servant. Duke Titus stomped a hoof, and a pair of Pegasus servants entered the room with plates balanced on their spread wings. They began to serve the dishes as he spoke. I'll have the servants bake something for you. A few moments of silence passed as breakfast was served. Whitehorn was the first to speak. Do you know, I had been curious at your change of heart yesterday. The Duke grunted. Am I not allowed to change my mind, Whitehorn? Or would you prefer to be on your way?
I don't think that's quite what he meant, darling,
Rarity said, giving the other noble a placating smile. We've been doing business for some time now, is all, my lord, Whitehorn said. And even before that, I'd heard about your stubbornness. Flattery won't get you anywhere, you know. Duke Titus shrugged as he picked a carrot with a silver fork. What can I say? I got a soft spot for my cult. The way he spoke about you when he came in, I just couldn't turn him down. Rarity pursed her lips, flicking an ear.
There's something off about this pony.
She turned to glance at Pinkie, who had her head cocked at the Duke curiously. Whitehorn nodded, a friendly smirk on his face. I suppose I'll have to remember your weakness if I need anything from you in the future. Now, tell me, my lord, how can I ease your concerns about my proposition? Duke Titus snorted, quickly falling back into his usual aloof gruffness. You know exactly what I'm concerned about. The barons won't stand for having some committee oversee them. He bumped a proud hoof against his chest. The land belongs to the nobility, and it's our right to decide what we do with it. Rarity frowned, clearing her throat.
And what about the ponies under your protection? What about Equestria as a whole?
What about 'em? The Duke countered. I know exactly what'd happen as soon as Equestria as a whole gets into my business. They'd be coming down on me for defending my own land, sending foreigners to patrol my roads, and knocking on my door hollering about my bits. What do I get out of it? Rarity's tail twitched under the table at the display of selfishness.
You get stability, of course,
she said.
Why can't you trust fellow equestrians? In my time, war between ponies was nothing but a myth. You could focus your efforts on your land and your ponies without threats from the outside.
Your time, huh? Duke Titus said, his voice dripping with skepticism. He gestured with a wink to the armor standing guard along the walls. My ancestors were warriors, Countess. I'm proud to fly in their wake. Consider, my lord, Whitehorn said. You have the largest domain on Altalusia. Only Duchess Nettlkiss can challenge you on her own. If you support the gifted table in Parliament, then your position will be unshakable. Your lineage will dominate Altalusia for generations. Is it really worth passing over that opportunity just to have a chance at expansion? Rarity turned to Whitehorn, eyes wide. That didn't sound like the kind of Equestria that they were trying to make. He met her gaze for just a moment before Duke Titus spoke. Now you're talking sense, the Pegasus said, rubbing at his chin with a huff. With a squad of gifted keeping any upstarts from becoming too unruly, even that old crone wouldn't be able to bother me.
And I'm sure your ponies would be way happier, too,
Pinkie chirped.
They wouldn't have to make grumpy faces at everyone that came to see you, for one thing.
The door to the hall opened, and Rarity was struck with a case of deja vu as Pontius stepped in. He was wearing a polished steel plate over his chest, partially hidden behind an orange tabard. The younger stallion did a considerably better job of keeping his jaw under control as he dipped his head in greeting. I'm going out for a public showing, Father.
A public show?
Pinkie asked, perking up.
Can I help? I've got a great ear for lyrics.
Showing, lass, Duke Titus corrected. To keep sure the peasantry don't forget the place. He turned to his son. Keep an eye on the woods, eh? Yes, sir, Pontius said. He turned to leave.
I'd like to come with you, darling,
Rarity said, standing up. She adjusted her mane with a hoof as Pontius looked back.
Is that fear in his eyes? The poor colt. I'm quite interested in seeing the land up close, as it were.
Pontius grimaced, glancing towards his father.
I'll come too,
Pinkie said, bouncing off her pillow and starting around the table.
If the ponies I've met have shown me anything, this place needs some Pinkie prowess.
Pontius tried to wave a hoof at the mares as they approached. Wouldn't you be more comfortable in the manor? I'm sure my father has much to talk to you about. That's fine, lad, Duke Titus said, eyeing his son intently. Show them around while I chat with Whitehorn here. Just be careful you don't lose them anywhere, yeah? For a moment, Rarity thought that Pontius was going to protest further. But the young Pegasus gave in under his father's glare. Yes, sir, he said. He beckoned with one wing as he held the door open with another. Lady Rarity, Miss Pie?
Thank you, dear,
Rarity said as she led the way through the door.
We shan't be too much trouble.
Pontius closed the door behind them before taking the lead. The sound of conversation faded away as they followed the path to the front door. He didn't look back as he spoke. Shall I send for her wagon, Countess? Rarity failed to suppress a giggle at the display of nerves.
I think we'll be fine walking. Pinkie?
Rarity blew a loud raspberry.
You know I just walk alongside anyways.
Pontius risked a glance back, his gaze lingering on Rarity's horn for just a moment. Ah, all right. So long as you're all right with the walk. A servant filly was scrubbing the entrance hall with a wet rag, and he beckoned her over with a huff. Head to the barracks and have a pair of soldiers sent to relieve the gate. The filly scampered off without a word. The rising sun greeted the trio as they stepped outside, rising between the imposing stone glares of Pontius's ancestors on their way down the steps into the garden. His barding gleamed in the morning light, turning the blades fastened to his wings into tinkling silver feathers. Rarity couldn't help but stiffen as she noticed them.
Are those truly necessary?
The same Pegasus mare as before was waiting at the gate. She straightened as they approached, rolling her shoulders.
My lord?
Pontius nodded. Ivory? Where's Onyx? There was a snort of alarm, and the unicorn stallion stepped into view from behind the stone wall that encircled the estate. Here, my lord. I've sent for replacements. I'd like both of you to come with us, Pontius said. Lady Rarity and her hoofmaiden will be accompanying me, and we must ensure their safety. Onyx exchanged a glance with Ivory before responding. Aye, my lord. With their numbers bolstered, the party left the walled safety of the estate and traveled down the meandering dirt path at a steady trot. Pontius walked in front while Ivory and Onyx brought up the rear. All three ponies observed the passing countryside with the sort of aloof alertness that Rarity had only seen in the eyes of royal guards. Although Rarity had already glimpsed much of the barren land during the ride from the shore, she enjoyed the opportunity to stretch her legs. Farmers worked endless fields nestled among rocky hills that were unsuitable for agriculture. The farmers toiled under wide-brimmed hats that hid their faces and protected them from the long hours of harsh sun. A dog would sometimes join them, receiving a few pets from Onyx or Pinkie before returning to its business. Songbirds played in every copse of trees along the road, while their larger cousins idly soared far above. If not for the soldiers in her peripherals, or the absence of the canterhorn on the horizon, Rarity might have imagined herself on a calming walk around the outside of the Everfree forest.
I do hope the other girls get Pinkie's invitation. I'm sure Fluttershy would love a soiree through the woods after all the dreadful ash and stone of Highton.
Pinkie was the first to break the peaceful silence.
So, your name is Ivory, huh?
She asked. Ivory's tail twitched.
Aye.
Another few seconds passed.
How come you didn't tell me your name yesterday?
Pinkie asked. Ivory shot her a sideways glare before looking away once more.
Workin'.
Pinkie frowned. She exchanged a glance with Rarity, who responded with a slight shake of the head. Pinkie screwed her eyes up before trying again.
You can talk while you're working, can't you?
She asked.
We can be friends.
Onyx cleared his throat. It's not that she can't talk, he said. She just don't wanna. From the way that Pinkie's jaw dropped, it was clear to Rarity that the matter was about to spin out of control. She laid a soft hoof on Pinkie's shoulder.
So, where are we going exactly? Is it very much further?
Just over that hill, Pontius said, gesturing forwards. I like to get out and speak with the peasants every few days.
To keep them in line, as your father said?
Rarity asked.
I do hope that's not what all these weapons are for.
The weapons are for your protection, my lady, Onyx said. He scanned the countryside as he spoke. It's unsafe to travel otherwise. And they're certainly not for the peasants, Pontius added as they approached the crest of the hill. I only hope to remind them that my father and I care for their safety. The weapons aid in that regard.
Huh. How kind of you,
Rarity said.
A sugarcoating for the truth, darling?
She certainly didn't feel very safe in the moment, tucked amidst a trio of armored ponies. She looked them over each once more. The memory of her scuffle in the fabric shop came to mind, easing her nerves. She and Pinkie would be able to defend themselves. if necessary.